Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One mic, two idiots, and, according to our latest figures, 3 listeners. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Hello and welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, Damien Fay, aka me, and for this week also your host. Now, don't panic, Andy is perfectly fine and will be back next week as normal. What we're doing this week is something a little bit different based on a suggestion from one of the listeners actually, Andy Norman, so thank you Andy for the suggestion. We're going to actually play my favourite interview from the One Giant Leap podcast series, and for many of you who haven't actually heard the series yet, I thought it would be great to have a break from the money stuff and to try something a little bit different. I'm not going to spoil who was my favourite. I do feel a bit Bruce Forsyth because they're all my favourites who I interviewed in the series, but I do want to try and inspire as many of you to follow your passions and also to go across and listen to the One Giant Leap podcast and subscribe. Now, I will just give you a quick hint before we go on to the podcast that my chosen favourite as a cause that I'm going to be looking to try and get behind and support even more. It's a fantastic cause, and also it's refreshing to have a female voice on the Money to the Masses podcast finally. We've never had one before, almost embarrassingly so that we haven't had one. So enjoy the podcast, do listen to it, and please let me know what you guys think of it.
Welcome to the One Giant Leap podcast. Find your passion. Build a dream.
Hello and welcome to the 3rd episode of the One Giant Leap podcast with me, your host Damien Fay. Now, I've been absolutely blown away by how popular this podcast has proven, how far it's gone up the iTunes charts, what people are saying about it on social media, so thank you to you all. And a lot of you have said how inspiring you found the first 2 interviews of this season, and I think you're going to find today's equally as inspiring for different reasons as well as some similarities. One of the big things about today's interview is that with last week's there was an element of somebody overcoming some real hardships, some real personal hardships, and turning that around to build a better life for themselves and other people. Now, today's story is an incredible woman called Scarlett who has a day job, and she came up with an idea to help the homeless and clothe the homeless in London, and ultimately has gone global, and she now does it in America as well. And so she's helping other people overcome their hardships. I've since met Scarlett after doing this interview, and she is as humble as she sounds on the interview. And I have to say, every now and then you meet somebody in life who you feel lucky to have met them because they have something that can inspire you, but they're just an amazing people who the world needs more of because they can change things. And now I truly believe that we all have that ability in us to change the world. It's just that society tends to knock that out of us, or we lose those dreams we had as children about the things we'd like to do. I mean, thank you for everything you said about the podcast, and keep sharing it. Please leave us reviews. One of the things on today's episode, listen right the way through to the end, because there's a story Scarlett tells which it brought a lump to my throat, and I'm not an emotional kind of guy. You'll see what I mean when you hear it. So for now, please enjoy this episode of the podcast. Welcome to the latest edition of the One Giant Leap podcast with your host Damien Fay. Now, this week I'm so excited about the guest that I've got. It's somebody I've been following for the last couple of years, a project that has been going on that has been very selfless, and something that I've been so impressed with that, unbeknownst to the person interviewing today, I have actually been promoting them via our own newsletters and things on Money to the Masses. So I was hoping they would actually come on this first series of the podcast, and I'm so pleased to say that Scarlett Montanera is here today to join me. Scarlett, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fantastic. First of all, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that lovely intro.
Well, that's okay, because I genuinely am excited about talking about your story, because it is so unusual, and I've heard nothing quite like it. And it's just to give people a bit of we'll come on to what you do and you can introduce it, but your story is slightly different to many other people because you are still in the slight early stages of your journey. You still have a full-time job, which we'll come on to, but what you've done today is so amazing. So, Scarlett, if you could just introduce yourself and tell everybody what it is you do.
Of course, yeah. My name's Scarlett Montanaro. I'm the co-founder of Kraken Cider. Kraken Cider is a shop where you can buy essential items for London's homeless, and then we take those items and distribute them around the capital through shelters and soup kitchens mostly. And we've actually just launched in San Francisco this winter too, so we're trading out there.
So to give the background, what you do, I came across you a couple of years ago. I think there was a press piece, and obviously there's a huge problem with homeless people, and I think you stumbled upon the idea because, like many people, you want to try and help people who are who are unfortunate and down on their luck.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, everybody does, but there's so few decent options out there. If you're passing somebody on the street that asks for spare change, so many people have these negative perceptions about where that money is going to be spent, rightly or wrongly. So we figured that was something really powerful to tap into, and be able to give to people a truly kind of direct and useful way to help that problem. Because people aren't walking past homeless people on the street every day and feeling good about it. They feel guilty and horrible for doing that. And that's what happened to us when we first came up with the idea. You know, we were approached and we said no. And my co-founder and I kind of looked at each other and was like, God, are we awful people for doing that? Why did we say no? And that's where the idea came from, really.
So you had a homeless person who obviously asked for help or money. And it's an interesting point because I've got a young daughter who, when she first encountered somebody who was homeless, they have a brilliant way of looking at things in life, where they look at something so simply and wondering why people don't have things and why some people do have things and why there is that inequality. And what you did is then you took the idea of, rather than donating money, like you said, the thing that stops people, because most people assume that homeless people are going to go and spend their money on drink and drugs, isn't it? And so this is where you came up with the name, isn't it? Where, just to give people the background, what you do is when people donate to your charity, essentially you buy packs, don't you?
Yeah, we buy essential items. So on the site we've got like thermal jackets or fleeces and hats and socks and backpacks and all sorts of essential items that someone living on the streets might need.
So where did you come up with the name? Because the name is Kraken Cider.
Yeah. Well, we kind of were approached by that guy, and we kind of came up with the rough idea of what Kraken Cider might look like, but obviously hadn't named it. And then we decided to come back to London and do some research into it. And we started talking to some people and visiting some shelters. And it was actually a homeless guy who told us, you know, people don't give me cash on the streets because they think I'll spend it on Kraken Cider. And at the time, we didn't realise quite what a genius name that was that he'd just said. But we kind of kept coming back to that quote. And we did worry about calling it that, obviously, because it is very bold and frank about the issue. But we thought, you know, there's no point skirting around it. That is what people think, and that is the perceptions that everybody holds. So why not take those horrible, dark thoughts that we've all got in the back of our minds and get people to talk about them and confront them, because that's the only way we're really going to move forward.
So you've got a day job, haven't you? Because this is you were obviously working, and you still have a day job now, don't you?
I do, yeah. I'm sat in my office as I speak to you.
And hence the reason why occasionally you may hear people walking around in the background, but that just shows you how real and raw what we're doing is, and how difficult Scarlett is to get hold of. So, which is why. but let's just so for you work in what industry do you work in?
I work in advertising.
So as soon as you came up with saw the Kraken Cider or heard the Kraken Cider idea, that was what your advertising brain kicked in.
Well, it did, but actually my advertising brain kicked in saying, panic, don't do this, what are you doing, get away from it, call it something middle of the road and normal. But we couldn't, you know, it was kind of our client head saying don't do it. And eventually you know, when something's a good idea, you just keep coming back to it and you can't beat it with anything else. I mean, we toyed with the name John's Shop because it was after someone that we met on the street. And we just thought, well, yes, that's lovely, but it's not as immediate, like the effect of it. People have to hear the story first. Whereas you hear Kraken Cider and you go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. And that's what you need, because people are sort of, you know, so busy and bombarded with all these different marketing messages all the time from every angle. So you just need something with cut through and something that people are going to talk about.
I mean, the name leapt out at me when I came across it in like I said a couple of years ago in a press article. And so let's jump back. There you are with your friend, and you thought about this idea that you'd like to. I mean, of all the things to pick in life, you went for something big. You decided you were going to try and help the homeless people, and it's something that is so admirable, but a very difficult thing to do. So you had an idea of what it could be, and you visualised it. How did you go from just an idea in your head to the first steps of taking? Like I say, you took a leap to go from an idea to take on the risk of doing this. I mean, how did that happen?
Well, we very nearly didn't, actually, because homelessness, as you say, is such a massive, massive issue. And we were so ignorant to it. But I think that was actually our saviour. So we came up with the idea and we said, oh, I know, we'll do a shop. We'll just make a shop and people can just buy directly for homeless people. And then there's no money exchanging hands. No one has to worry about anything. And then we came back and we were like, oh, for God's sake. We started meeting shelters and understanding the issue a lot more. And we thought, we can't just give people jackets. They need a house. These people need healthcare. They need support. They need so many other things. It's so much bigger than just a jacket. Why? This is almost an insult. And then we almost, because of that, decided not to actually make it at all. But thankfully, after that initial kind of blow to our confidence in the idea, we took a step back and said, yeah, but I'd rather be doing something than nothing. So we made it. We went out and researched about it, and we used our skills in marketing and advertising and PR to build something that we knew people were going to want to look at and spend time with online. And yeah, I don't know, really. It's just we just kept going with it. I think...
But sorry to cut across you there, but one of the things that resonates, you said that you had another skill set which you took and applied to a very different field and for a very different purpose. So, I mean, that's incredible. Then, when did you realise you were onto something? Because you mentioned there you had that doubt in the idea. When did you realise that actually this is a good thing? We're doing something here. This is a good idea.
Well, there was always that little hopeful voice in the back of my head going, do you know what, this could be big. And I would kind of shut it up and be like, no, don't be stupid. This is just a little side project between my friend and I, because, in advertising, you can be waiting 5 years for this kind of brief and for this kind of project. So many stars have to align. So we decided that we would create our own project to show the skills that we have, because a lot of the time in advertising, you're not able to sort of flex your creative muscles as perhaps you might like to. So for us, it was just about doing something truly different to anything else that was out there, and proving that, the charity sector needed shaking up a little bit, and just showing what we could do, as well as obviously doing something great at the end of it. But we never really expected it to take off in the way that it did. And it was so amazing to see the kind of sales that we were getting so quickly, and the way that the public got behind it. People were so generous, and it just shows that they were crying out for another option and for a way to help the cause.
Can we talk about some of those successes? Because obviously you've had, like you say, something that was a side project and you trying something new. You've had some obviously big successes. So just to let some of the listeners know, let's talk about those.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was funny, really. The press that we got was amazing. I think that's, again, down to the name. It's kind of headline grabbing, but we ended up on primetime BBC News and ITV News, and my nan rang me one day and was like, Scarlett, you're on the news. I was like, yes, Nan, that's my face. It was just stuff that you weren't expecting, and obviously then that started translating into the amount of stuff people were buying on the site. So within the first 6 weeks, we had £35,000 of donations.
Wow.
And we had this tiny little target in our heads, between Charlie, my co-founder, and I. We were like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing? What if we sold £1,000 worth of stock? Wouldn't that be so great? And we were like, okay, so that was £35,000. It's been 6 weeks. And now we're up to, since including our launch in San Francisco, we're up to over $100,000. And it's just amazing. I can't even believe that it's happened this way. And because of that, because of that initial early success, we decided to continue it because it was only going to be a 6-week project, distribute everything in time for that first Christmas, and then that was that.
I love the almost modesty in what you're telling the story of that amount of donations in such a short period of time. Now people will understand why I was so keen to talk to you, to hear this story, because for people listening to this podcast, it's actually the first time I've fully heard Scarlett's story in a detail. So that £35,000 at the beginning, so those 6 weeks, what would that have produced in terms of the physical products that you were able to distribute?
Well, I can tell you after the first winter, so the first 6 weeks that was £35,000, and then I think by the end of January, which would have been more money, but I don't exactly know the figures, but we distributed 6,000 items over that first winter.
Wow.
And we had no idea where to find that many homeless people. It was a nightmare, but it was an incredible problem to have. But we were just having to call around all these shelters and soup kitchens and everyone that we could find, just saying, look, how many people do you have in your shelter? How many people do you serve each week? Would you like to clothe them entirely for free? And we'll turn up with a van tomorrow. And they were like, obviously, yes. So we just had this mad few weeks of just trying to get everything out to people because we just weren't expecting it. And we weren't built for that kind of growth or those kind of, distribution logistics. We just thought we'd hire a little van and drive our little £1,000 worth of jackets around London one day on the weekend. But it was a major operation.
What did that feel like when you went and handed out the first set of clothing to some of the homeless people in those shelters? I mean, how did it feel?
I mean, it was incredible, and I've had so many tragic and heartbreaking stories since, because actually a lot of the time, because we do work full time, that's one of the things that I'm a bit sad about really, is that when we do turn up with a van, it's usually I'm not even there. But a few times, obviously, we've been and seen the work of the shelters and met the people behind it, and it's just it's crazy. You kind of think I'm the reason why he's wearing that jacket, and I'm the reason why he's warm because of my idea, something that I had the guts to start and follow through. It's actually out in the real world. So the other day I was walking past Tottenham Court Road Station and I handed a guy a couple of quid out of my pocket, and I looked up at him and noticed he was wearing a hat from Cracken Cider, and I just cried.
Oh, I'll tell you what, though.
Down the street just crying by myself. It's so embarrassing.
I mean, I am not an emotional kind of guy, but listening to this now, it brings almost a tear to my eye, because it's such an incredible story to go from the feeling of not helping that guy and then analysing the original person and why you didn't. And then, I mean, that person probably would never know the sort of butterfly effect that had been unleashed, and which is what's so wonderful about the reason I wanted to do this podcast, was to hear stories just like yours that could then inspire other people to do similar things who are listening to this now and might try something that it may be for their own benefit or for others. I mean, that is so amazing to get a full circle. And we're talking about London here, and London is there'll be lots of people who don't live in the UK who listen to this podcast, and London is a big place. There's a lot of people in it, and for that to happen is mind-blowing. But I just want to jump back on a point you mentioned, because you've now do it in the US as well, don't you?
Yeah, we do. Well, my co-founder moved out there for a job, and San Francisco was a place that we always had discussed opening up, because it's the other place in the world that suffers terribly from homelessness. And when she got the job out there, it just seemed like fate. So yeah, she's opened up out there.
And of course, that's why you were talking about in dollars earlier on.
Yeah.
So what's the plan next? So you're on this incredible journey. So when did it start? How many years ago? Was it 2 years ago that it started?
We talk about them in winters, really, but it was winter 2015 that we started. So about 18 months. Yeah,
so 18 months for people who listen to the podcast in the future. I mean, such incredible success in such a short period of time. So what are your plans for Cracken Cider? I mean, because you're early stages of your successful journey, and you've taken that big leap to start the idea and run with it, and all the logistical issues that you probably had along the way, and stories and things you've heard. But then the next step for you, I'm guessing at some point you would want to do this full time, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. It's just a bit of a vicious cycle at the moment, because to be able to go full time, we would have to find some funding, because I mean, as much as I'd love to not get paid and be able to do it anyway, it's not possible. But in order to find investment, then you need time, which I don't have. So it's a difficult one, but I'm definitely planning on making it bigger. We've got a big winter campaign for London coming up, because the San Francisco launch this year kind of took it all out of me. So we did very minimal activities in London, but people were still coming back to the shop. I did no marketing, no PR, no nothing. And people were just off their own back, just coming back to our shop and buying stuff this winter. And that in itself is amazing. But yeah, I think November we're going to be back with a big launch in London. So that's the short-term plans. And hopefully, ideally, we'd love to make it bigger. We'd love to be more than just a brand that gives out jackets. We'll always stay true to that. But if we can find a way to create jobs or to offer a lifeline for people that extends beyond that jacket, if it was training or any sort of healthcare services or anything like that, that's where we would really love to be. And it seems like such a crazy dream, because at the beginning we didn't have a plan. It was just a 6-week project. So it seems crazy me sat here talking to you about all of these big things that could be a very real reality. So yeah, my own mind is blown as I'm talking to you.
Do you know what? One of the things somebody once said to me, you sometimes have to sit back and acknowledge some of the achievements you make. And obviously, like you saying there, your mind's blown. I mean, you've achieved some amazing things, but you're probably always thinking about the next thing and the next thing, to sit back. And I mean, what are you most proud of? I mean, I almost feel silly asking, because there's so much there you could pick from. But is there anything in particular that you are particularly proud of that you've done within the project?
Well, there's the huge thing of trying to reinvigorate the charity sector. That's a huge thing that I'm incredibly proud of, because it hopefully will have some kind of knock-on effect to the way that other people are running their charities, and that will have a huge effect on loads of different causes around the world. But also, actually for me, on a very personal level, I got a story back from a shelter the other day who said that a guy had come over to her. This was very recently, actually. It was only in January. And a homeless guy had come over to her. She's the shelter manager, and said in a sort of very quiet voice, "Excuse me, do you know if you have any spare plastic bags? Because mine are all, they've got holes in and all my stuff's falling out and getting wet in the rain." And she apparently said to him, "Well, don't worry, yes, I'll get you a bag now, but actually we're having a delivery of backpacks in this week, so you'll be able to get a backpack." And the guy wept with relief.
Wow.
And when you start to think that a backpack can make you cry with relief, is just a point of life that I will never be able to understand. Well, I mean, I could, I'm only 2 paychecks away from being in that sort of position, I'm sure, but those are the kind of stories that I started this for. And it blows my mind every time I think about that, I can't even imagine being in that position, and it's so amazing to be able to do something to help.
I think everybody listening to this podcast has either got their jaw on the floor, or been listening intently and probably crashed their car, because I think it's such a mind-blowing story that I can't. I'm just in awe of what you've managed to achieve, because you've just had the foresight and obviously the idea, but then just to follow it through. And then even when there was the moments of self-doubt, because I mean that's a big thing, isn't it? Any leap of faith or anything you try to build, there is that nagging down. And people listen to this story, there's so much they could take away, but is there anything you would like people who listen to this your story, the sort of takeaway?
One thing I would have to say is that you just have to ignore what everybody else tells you. You can take on bits of advice here and there, but it's so easy when you're sharing your idea initially to get taken by everything and trying to please everybody else. But the amount of times we pitched the idea Kraken cider, everyone was like, "You can't call it that." And if we hadn't, we wouldn't have been able to reach as many people as we had. And we've had a lot of not a lot, but a bit of negativity about the name. We've got our own little set of internet trolls that like to antagonise us as often as possible. But you just have to ignore them and just keep going and keep strong to your goals. And I don't know, it's just, if you keep true to that and you know where you want to be, then it's relatively easy to keep going.
Scarlett, thanks so much for telling the story. It's been incredible. Can you now just plug Kraken Cider to your heart's content? Where do people go? I know you're saying that you tend to do it in winters, but just tell everybody about how they could find out more or whatever.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's nice and easy name to remember, krakencider.com. We've got all this stuff up there to buy. We've got a women's pack actually at the moment called the Fanny Pack that I am shamelessly promoting, which is specifically aimed at the women who live on the streets who have limited access to sanitary care. So each pack contains loads of tampons and towels for her for each month, and it's got little sort of what we would take for granted, but things like tweezers and nail files and a compact mirror and a hairbrush and just little bits and bobs to try and make women on the streets feel a little bit more like themselves again. So that's available to buy on the site. And follow us on Twitter as well. We've got @KrakenCider. We're not so hot on the social medias, but if we have got any news or anything coming through, then that's where you can keep up to date with us.
Brilliant. Everybody who listens to this podcast, if you can support Scarlett and her endeavour with Kraken Cider, then please do, because it's one of those things that it would be, just imagine what Scarlett would achieve if she was on this full time. I mean, it'd be incredible. Thank you for coming on the show and talking about it. It's one of the most amazing stories I've heard, particularly of somebody who's taken this leap of faith and followed an idea. And with no doubt that we'll keep in touch. And as your story unfolds, I mean, it's just it's a marvellous one. I'd love to keep bringing updates to people about. So thanks for coming on the show, Scarlett, and for taking the time to tell us and share your insights.
Oh, that's no problem at all. Thanks for listening.
So that was Scarlett's journey. In this summary at the end of the podcast, I just want to pull out some key points, some fascinating things that Scarlett shared with us there that we all could probably learn from if we're trying to take our own leaps. And one of the big ones for me certainly was the idea that we can change the world. And it feels sometimes silly to dream big and to have these great ideas that we want to change the world for the better, tackle inequality. But what we do is we just sometimes think, well, what can I do? Who am I? And it's that thought process. These people need us, and they need us to explore ideas we have. They may fail. And as Scarlett told in her story, there were so many times where she could have given up, and there were so many times where perhaps she doubted her idea because other people didn't believe in it. But sometimes you have to go with your gut instinct and have faith in what you're doing, because do you know what? As Scarlett pointed out there, it's better to really have tried than not to have tried at all. And if it had failed, then at least she was trying to make a difference. And one of the things that Scarlett highlighted there was the idea that she tried to understand the problem she was also solving. She didn't necessarily have an inherent understanding of the problem, but she knew she wanted to change it. And there's been similarities with other people we've already interviewed that were trying to solve some form of problem. And hers was the homeless and a very altruistic quest of hers. Now, she educated herself about what that problem was, and that is a key part for her idea inevitably working and being taken on board by people. But she understood the frustrations of the audience who would actually end up paying as well. So she understood the problem, but she understood the same issues that she had when it came to donating money, which is I think why it worked so brilliantly. Now, Scarlett has a daytime job, and I would love, as part of this podcast, that she had the support to be able to go full time in what she is doing. And she will. I know she will. She will be able to, because we need people like her to do that and to take that final one giant leap, because she's taken a number of them along the way. And I think the homeless people out there, I think you would agree, need people like Scarlett to be out there helping her and coming up with these ideas. Another quick key point about Scarlett's story is that she actually started the project as a means to showcase her skill set that she had in the industry in which she was. So she kind of created the perfect brief. Now, there have been cases where I've seen that happen, and personally that happened to me. That was one of the reasons I started Money to the Masses, was also the altruistic purpose, but there was also the element to prove to myself and showcase the skills that I had that weren't being used or utilised in any way in my day job. So sometimes if you don't have an idea of what it is you want to do, what your great idea will be or what your calling is, sometimes it's great just to try and showcase what you've already got, the skills you have, and then you will find your destination. You will find what your passion. It will become something. I think you will find it. The other thing is that just because you're in one industry doesn't mean you have to inhabit that, because Scarlett moved industry. She transformed the charitable sector using ideas from advertising. Now, that is sometimes some of the best ways to disrupt industries, to transform other areas. I mean, finance is, again, another perfect example that needs innovation. And you could take the skill sets you have in whatever your job is. Don't undersell yourself. Whatever job you've got and the skill sets you have, there are other areas that if they applied to could blow up and make something amazing happen. Just because they're not necessarily valued in the same way in where you're working now doesn't mean they can't be used. Look at your skills rather than the job that you do. I mean, that's it for this week. Again, another wonderful story, and I hope please feedback on it, and please join the Facebook groups and tell us what you think about the story. And again, Scarlett would love to see and hear about what you think about what she's doing. One quick point, actually, I almost missed on there, is you're going to have plenty of detractors if you do something, and as Scarlett said, you've got to ignore them and focus on the positives, because there will always be negative people out there, even for something like what she is doing, which I find hard to believe there are any negative people out there who would criticise her, but that just shows that some people are just of that ilk. Again, please leave us reviews and on the podcast and subscribe and tell everybody about it. Now, next week, what we're going to do, we've got another wonderful interview, and as I touched upon just now, the world of finance is a good example of a sector that needs innovation. You'd think that there was nothing that could be done in finance because there are big, massive, billion-dollar companies that have soaked up everything, and they dominate the market. But actually, having some innovation and doing things a bit differently, you can actually gain more of a foothold and more influence than all those companies combined. It might sound unbelievable, but trust me, whatever you do, you could become influential, and it's about influence. So next week's interview is somebody who's become a good friend of mine now, actually, over the years, and his name is Pete Matthew. He does something wonderful in the world of finance using his voice. So until next week, again, please leave reviews and email me at damien@moneytothemasses.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at moneytothemasses with the number 2. And don't forget, please subscribe to our other podcast, the Money to the Masses podcast, where we talk about and educate people on all areas of finance, but we do it in a very light-hearted way. So until next week, thanks very much. So there you have it, Money to the Masses podcast listeners, a One Giant Leap special. Now, having listened back to that interview, I am pleased with my choice as that being the favourite from the first season. Now, Andy and I will be back as ever next week with the usual money stuff. So until then, please leave a podcast review for both podcasts, as it will help push them both up the iTunes chart. So until next time, goodbye.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.